Hello, my wonderful hackers of the great metropolis known as Richmond. Yeah, and that's right, you are a hacker. You may not be a black hat hacker, you may not be a white hat hacker, but you're a general purpose technologist hacker, if you're honest. Anyway, welcome back to another episode of RVA Tech Talks, the podcast where I sit down with the sorcerers, the mystics, the forensies, shout out to Harry Potter, of this forbidden forest that is the Richmond tech scene, and talk to them about whatever they're interested in. This episode is brought to you by Summit Human Capital. Whether you're building a tech team or just looking for your next gig, you're going to want to partner with somebody who actually cares about building a relationship with you, not just somebody who thinks in terms of the transaction and the bottom line. And Glenn Dearson, he witnessed this firsthand after launching a successful office in DC for a global staffing firm, and he came back to Richmond to create a new way of solving that eternal conundrum of staffing tech teams. If you're a manager or an engineer, you know what I'm talking about. And he wanted to do it in a way rooted firmly in what he calls key core values.
So I'll get here in the morning right around 6. And the first thing we do is right when you walk into the headquarters, what we want people to see is our key core values. So right when you walk in, you're seeing right away honesty, openness, effort. You're seeing every single one listed, because what we talk about when we hire associates here is it's not just living and breathing our key core values inside of work, because that's not really genuine. It's also who is the individual when no one's looking. And we're really looking for that. And it's easier said than done. And a constant reminder of social responsibility and what we owe to ourselves, our friends, our family, people that we may meet right off the street, and how they should be treated. So we want that to be the very first thing that you see, which it is. As soon as you come across that wall, you see our KCBs, which we live and breathe inside and outside the office.
So isn't this like 100% the guy you want on your side when you're either staffing a tech team or trying to find your next opportunity? I think so. Check them out at summithumancapital.com. Hope everyone's doing well in this weird era of being at home all the time. Hope everybody's taking their mental health very, very seriously and avoiding burnout, for example. Though, to be honest, I'm kind of calling the kettle black because I am myself going through the trough of a pretty nasty burnout. Anyways, I digress. This week, I bring you a very special guest. And honestly, one of my favorite guests I've had on the show to date. His name is Dr. Greg Patrick, and he's a doctor, like I said, of computer science. And he was also born and raised down in Petersburg and went to college, studied computer science, went on to get his master's degree, his doctorate, eventually in computer science, did crazy distributed systems research for DoD-sponsored projects up in the Beltway. And then eventually became a dean. So this dude's like a serious academic. and then eventually left to join Capital One. And then eventually jumped over to Terazo. We talk about his upbringing, how he thinks about education, his experience as a black man in academia and in tech. And I mean, honestly, I don't know what exactly it is about Greg, other than what I've said so far. But this was like my favorite conversation, like I said. And you know what? I'm just going to stop talking. Without further ado, I bring you a man who I would say is perhaps the most interesting man in Richmond, Greg Patrick. I love your little, whoever's watching the video, I love the little low-key plug for Terazo right now.
Look, I normally wear this whenever I go on even in meetings or whatever, like if, under normal cases when the camera's off, I'm like, man, who knows what kind of shirt it is, right? But on a day when I'm having meetings, when I'm showing the camera, I usually wear a Terazo t-shirt. So it's kind of
those are good looking t-shirts.
Yeah, not bad, man. Not bad. I got Trevor. They did a great job with it. So
yeah. So Terazo wasn't always named Terazo, right?
Nope. Used to be called API Vista, right? So that kind of focused on the fact that it was mostly an API-centric business, and was getting built out using the API strategy as the main thing. But of course, once you get in there and start exposing those, people want data information, they want DevOps information, you get managed services. So
right.
It's got to be better to, broaden the name a bit.
Yeah. APIs are like, so 2010.
Well, I think the bigger issue is folks wonder why the API people are doing DevOps or why the API people are doing data stuff, right? So
Yeah.
it gives us a way to say, look, we've taken all of these pieces, which sort of like this Italian Terazo tile, right, which is made of a bunch of small aggregate pieces to make the whole. So we followed that pattern and came up with the name Terazo. So
Yeah, cool. So we kind of jumped ahead there. But so sorry for that. But to take a pause, first of all, I just want to say my kids are getting home, and you may hear some noises.
all good.
But it's just the I'm just the zookeeper here, so who knows what you'll hear. So you work at Terazo, obviously. So you are have a very interesting background. You're currently a marketing. But I'll let you tell the story. But I just think your background is really interesting. So I want to ask sort of where you began and you can start however far back you want, even to your childhood. But how did you get to be the Greg Patrick that people know and love today?
Yeah, interesting question. So it goes back. I guess I was going to say something weird, like it goes back to like my parents or whatever. But it really,
That's not weird. Yeah.
Kind of start with it. Yeah. So I actually grew up in Petersburg, Virginia. So real close area around here. And my family's a really close-knit family. We are folks who our grandfather actually bought a farm like many, many years ago. So it's like a really self-sufficient, go after it, and learn a bunch of things kind of folks, right?
Right.
So I learned a lot from my uncles and people like that who were spending a lot of time doing a lot of technical things, farm equipment, whatever. And so you see this stuff and you recognize that folks are, working on cars and changing different things, perspective, right? So a lot of those things kind of carried over into my work ethic, right? So that's kind of a way to level set that as a beginning to start on talking about this computer science.
Totally. Yeah.
Path forward. Yeah. So just having that kind of group, you weren't really intimidated by new things. So
right.
The first
almost
thing
like just to pause, like almost like because that mentality is really interesting that you bring that up. So it's almost like a tradesman's mentality.
Yes,
in a way,
very much,
or like a journeyman's mentality.
Yes. And they, anything from building a new barn or whatever it was that they needed to do, right? They would figure out how to do it and go do it. They were problem solvers, right? They still are problem solvers.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads you to that path where whatever you need to solve, there's a solution. You just need to figure out how you're going to express it and what you're going to express it in. They used a bunch of gears and all that kind of stuff. I use a computer, right? So it's no difference. It's just a different tool to work with. So, I look back and I was thinking earlier today about, some of the things that that kind of got me here. And I started off like in fifth grade, man. Like a lot of people, we had like these Apple IIe's or whatever. So we're using like this logo program to draw stuff. And it was cool, right? It was just a new thing. It was different. And that kind of got me started playing with computers early on. I actually had an uncle who had a Commodore 64. I used to like go to his house and write little programs. I didn't know what I was writing. I had a little computer magazine. Not sure how I got it now when I think back on it, but I used to type programs in and watch them play or whatever and stuff.
Man,
like that.
those computer magazines, I feel like that was like the YouTube of whatever age it was in. Like I can't tell you how many people like I've heard say I got into programming. Someone gave me one of these little magazines and I had
no doubt.
It's amazing though. So I didn't mean to interrupt. I just think that's so funny.
No, cool, man. So yeah, it was like we were doing that and I was playing around with that thing and eventually decided I wanted to go into electronics actually, because I thought that was the cool thing. So I had soldering irons around the house and played around with that kind of stuff all the time and thought I would go be an electronics engineer, right? So I eventually go to college as an electronics engineer and I take a Fortran class, right? Because that was required the first semester. And I was like, man, no, this is the programming thing. I was hooked again, right? The same way I was in the fifth grade. So I'm like, no, I got to change my major to computer science, right? So I changed my major to computer science that next semester. And from that point forward, I just hit the ground running. So because the thing was in electronics, I loved the digital part. That was the main part, the Boolean algebra and all of that stuff. So it was natural. It's like a natural fit for the kind of stuff I'm interested in. So long story short, go ahead. Are you going to say something there? But
yeah, I was just going to say the digital part. What do you mean by the digital part?
So, when you start doing those electronics classes, you learn all of the analog circuits first. So you do some things like, you've got potentiometers and you're changing resistance and doing all these other kind of experiments that are really like analog circuits. And then you start doing digital circuits with the logic gates and the stuff like that, right? So you had to put the Boolean algebra in to build a multiplexer or whatever it was you were trying to build. And it was really a lot more like programming than it was building circuits, even though you were still doing it in hardware, right? You still had to have a logical way to form the output, right? So you build an adder or something like that. So I really
like that interface part as opposed to the soldering.
So I didn't mind the soldering. I liked it, but I liked soldering things that were more in silicon, right? Because those things where you went and got a chip that had, say, 4 AND gates on it, and then you had an OR gate on this chip, and you had to like wire them together to produce some circuit that produced an output based on some Boolean algebra thing that the teacher said build, right? So it was kind of cool, man, because it's like, make a program that's going to produce that's going to add 2 numbers, right? It seems simple, not really a program, but a circuit, right, that did that. So you built small adders and stuff like that, which translates well to doing it in software later on, right? It's the same basic approach. So that gave me that line between the hardware and the software and everything else. When I finally saw the software, it's like, I know exactly what's happening down there in that silicon somewhere. These gates are tripping and doing this stuff. So,
man, that's so cool. I honestly, that's one of those things that my first experience with technology was, SSHing into a Linux box in Amazon. And sometimes I feel like it would, like, with the way my mind works, I want to go back, and I actually bought a Raspberry Pi and just haven't played around with it yet. Right. But I want to go back and even maybe take a step further and I don't know, at least learn more about how things work at that level, because it does seem, I don't know, it's always weird to work in a system or in an environment that you don't understand the underpinnings of. But that's just so cool to hear you talk about it, just because like I don't hear many people talking about like that. They know actually how the circuit board is wired together, or at least how it would be done in theory.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's totally it's a lot of fun to me when I don't know, I've had a thing about seeing the physical output of some piece of code. So it's that same kind of thing, right? Where I remember being in undergrad, man, and I wrote my first program to write a file to a disk, and it was like, oh man, the hard disk lit up. It was like, that was like the most fascinating thing ever to me, right? And but back then all of the stuff was a little more, like say, nose to the ground, right? You had to write the program, you had to actually compile it, then you had to link the object files. I mean, so it was so much more discrete in the pieces. So you do understand a lot more of what happens in the hardware. This is what happens at the next level up, and so forth and so on.
So you got bit by the software engineering bug. And what happened next?
Yeah, so like I said, went through undergrad, and then I actually went to graduate school. Went and got my master's and my doctorate at George Washington as well. So I did my undergrad at Norfolk State, and then I got to George Washington, and that just blew my mind, because all the things I had learned to that point. I mean, I had learned to program a bunch of things, and then I learned how to like squeeze the size of that stuff down to like a third of the size, right? Because it's just so many new techniques and theories and practices. So I went there and did that for a while. And then
and that was, sorry to interrupt, that was, you were getting a Doctor of Science and a master's in computer science.
That's correct. Yeah.
So you were just diving deep into the actual computer science. Yes. Okay. Interesting. So you got a doctorate. What was your thesis?
So, okay, it's a page turner, and this title is like a mouthful, right? I'm gonna say it.
I'm ready.
At least I would think it is, right? It was my life's work at that point. But it was the title of it was distributed. So it was reusability metrics for distributed object computing based. I think that I almost got to read it myself now at this point. The bottom line was I was looking at systems like Corba and DCOM, a bunch of distributed computing systems, and figuring out how you could do reusability metrics that allowed you to figure out how reusable your code was when you switch between these different distributed environments. Reusability metrics for distributed object computing based systems was really what it came down to.
And was it all theory, or was it did you do any like empirical testing or?
Yeah, it was awesome, man. So I got to, that was where I really got that experimental bug too. So it was, first it was a theory, right? So there was a person that my advisor knew, and it totally coincidentally happened that I referenced her work. He's like, oh, I went to grad school with her. I'm like, man, it's a small world. But at any rate, she had built this framework for identifying the value in certain metrics and stuff like that. So I did all of the theoretical work to say these metrics, are correct. There were 9 metrics. And then I went and actually did the empirical testing to see if they held up, against the theoretical framework as well. So it's really interesting work. A lot of Java applications then, and having a bunch of people come to a web experience where I generated a bunch of documentation, had them do some stuff, and then measured how reusable certain things were based on the metrics to see if they panned out. And I believe 8 out of the 9 did statistically match. So
wow, that is really interesting. Okay, so after that, you're in this deep academic world. What happened next?
Yeah, so it's cool because actually I went to school. Department of Defense actually had funded the fellowship I was on. Them and George Washington together had partnered for this. So for a while, I was actually a government researcher first.
Was that the National Physical Sciences Consortium?
Yep.
So that was DoD funded.
So yeah, the way it works, that program has a bunch of different types of sponsors. Some are DoD, some might be, various different ones. Like there were people who did meteorology or whatever. Mine happened to be DoD funded mine. And George Washington, they had a partnership where the university covered like your tuition and stuff like that. The partner covered your stipend and your summer work and that kind of stuff. So I did that. And then when I left there, I went to work for the DoD for a while as a government researcher in information assurance, just to follow that work out. So it's really cool.
And that was right after 9/11, right around 9/11.
It was actually right in that time frame because I remember the day it happened. I was actually on my way to the office, and they turned us back and said, "Don't go in there." But yeah, I was still there during that time. It was a weird feeling because it had happened, and we knew that there was a potential threat, with us going in. But it was like
were you going into the Pentagon?
No, I wasn't going to the Pentagon. I was actually going to Fort Meade.
Okay.
So we knew that it was possibly a target as well, but there was
right.
This thing that compelled you to go, man. When you saw it on TV, it's like, well, I'm going anyway, and then they just told us to turn back. But
so did that change your education or your job from a like? Did that change things at all for you? Just the wake of 9/11, or were you kind of insulated from the impact, at least from like in your academic world?
So academically, yeah, not really any real changes. By that time, I was already actually just a straight up government employee, right? And I hadn't quite left to go into a faculty position yet. Even though I had taught like as an adjunct, but not a full-time faculty member. But it did drive a whole bunch of, I don't know, it's weird. There's a level of pride or something you get in knowing that the work you're doing is helping, people who were impacted by that. So that's the thing that I got out of that the most, right? It was more like you feel a sense of duty. I don't know how else to describe it, man. And it's just like your part of it might not be to go and grab a weapon or do this other thing, but it's like, you're contributing to, bringing justice to the people who did it and also protecting people, on the other side of it. So it's really interesting work, man. Right. Great way to apply computer science and see it like tactically being used to do something good.
Yeah. So how long were you with the DoD?
So if I count my time as a graduate student and through, I was there from 1995 up through 2002, I believe it was.
Okay.
Yeah. So spent a good bit of time there doing work there. So very interesting work, man. I mean, it's one thing I'll say about it, just not to go back in the story, but as an undergraduate, I also worked at Bell Labs. So it was one of the places I did my internships. Right. And for the summers. Right. And the two experiences had one thing in common. And that was they really expanded my mind about what computer science could do. Right. What you really did in computer science. The Bell Labs days, it was weird, man. I went in, it was like the cellular switching unit. Right. So back then they were selling cell switches. And you go into this lab and they're like, hey, we're going to have you write a program that simulates a car switching from one cell tower to another. And I'm like, man, this all sounds cool, but I have no idea how to do anything you're about to tell me to do. Right. So,
yeah.
So I go in, and it's cool, man. It's this lab. I sit down and I log. They say, you're going to log into the switch. I'm like, oh man, this is some deep stuff, right? And I log into it, and it's a Unix terminal. And I'm like, wait a minute. It's like, it just clicks. Like up until then, a computer was just like this thing with a screen and a keyboard and whatever. But then it was like, man, they're everywhere. And it seems simple, but it just opens your mind when you see it in action, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that program,
and for you, that revelation was every device has an interface.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
Yep,
yeah.
It's all the same. They all have CPUs. They all have RAM. They all work basically the same way. If you can program one, you can program any of them, right? That's the thing to get, right? And then at my time at the DoD, it was a very similar thing where we were programming across a wide variety of you see people programming a bunch of different places, embedded devices. You got, web stuff. It's just all over the place, right? And it's like, man, this whole thing is just this huge, beautiful mesh of silicon stuff that you can actually control if you know how to do it. So
right.
It makes you feel, I don't know, it makes you feel like empowered or whatever, So.
Yeah. So by 2002, you've done have this incredible wealth of experience and technical depth. I mean, I would imagine like these days, like if you had that equivalent these days, you would have, Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, all knocking at your door, trying to get you to become, an engineer for them. Did you have a similar experience with just like having like a ton of options, or was it? I know like 2002 is like post the .com bubble, so and maybe you were like what was that experience for you moving from being an academic / DoD employee to what you did next?
Yeah, so it was interesting. Actually, I don't remember a whole bunch of other things at that time because I was so ingrained in that kind of work. I mean, these people worked at a high level, man. He was surrounded by just smart people all over the place. So, so you didn't really feel like you had to make a move at that point. I mean, to your point, .com bubbles had burst and everything. And I mean, at that point, a government gig where you were doing some really cool work wasn't a bad spot. So it was interesting that I actually made the transition to academia. I actually became a faculty member because I had taken a friend's daughter to go tour some universities. Like, hey, look, this would be some cool stuff. And I got there, and I actually had gone back to my alma mater. And they said, well, hey, why don't you come back? And I'm like, I don't know. You don't think about going to be a faculty member when you're doing this other kind of stuff every day. Yeah. And but it was cool because the dean, who was a big influence on me when I was a student as well, she was one of my faculty members, had said to me, she said, I know you always thought about being in business for yourself and stuff like that, even as a student. She said, this will be the closest thing you can get to owning your own thing and still being able to do like great research and do everything. It's the best of both worlds. And I was sold, right? So I jumped into the academic world at that point and became a faculty member, still doing research with the government during that time. So that's how I made that transition from full-time government to academia.
Okay.
It was pretty cool, man. I've always enjoyed teaching. That's one of the things I've done even from when I got my master's. I started teaching as an adjunct. So it'd be weird. I was at Loyola up in Maryland. And I teach these undergrad students. They didn't know that I was as scared as them the first time I went in class, man, because I'm like this, I'm the same age as them almost, right? So I jumped from there over. I would leave there in the afternoon and head to class at night, right? I would be a teacher during the day and a student at night. So I got that bug then too. But this was the first time I had shifted and become a full-time faculty member. And then I would do research and consulting where I could in the evening. So I always kind of did both to dabble a little bit,
Right. I'd like to pause for just a moment and mention this week's sponsor, Summit Human Capital. If you need technology, recruiting, or IT services, aka if you have a talent gap on your IT team, or maybe you're just an individual in search of a new career opportunity, well, you're going to want to check these folks out. Because at Summit Human Capital, they just do things a little bit differently. And that approach focuses on relationships, not just transactions. Your engagement with Summit Human Capital starts by working to uncover your vision first, your own personal vision for yourself, for your career, for your business. Because the Summit Human Capital family wants to genuinely and authentically know your broader goals. And once they have a pulse on that, they can be extremely effective at finding the right fit. they also know that vision may change over time, and that's why they think in the long term, not just the short term. And they want to be your service of choice, not just today or not just tomorrow, but next year, next decade, forever. The Summit Way is all about building these long-term relationships and positively changing lives for your company, for your business, for the people around you, for yourself. And if you're a candidate that's ready for the next career move, or maybe you're just an employer with a huge talent gap, a burning talent gap on your IT team, then please reach out to summithumancapital.com and allow these folks to prove why they consistently rate 5 out of 5 stars, why they've grown 1,000% over the past 2 years, why they're the best in town. Summit Human Capital, positively changing lives by connecting talent to opportunity. I almost hesitate to ask this question because it could be just like an afterthought for you, but like, I would imagine too at that time, the tech field not being the most diverse place in the world. Were you like kind of an only in terms of being a black man, or and then did that, like, was that a big part of your experience, or was it just kind of like, did you not feel, or was that not a big deal because it's, again, like you could say maybe it's just a bunch of engineers doing engineering and they're not really thinking about who you are. It's mostly what you do. But again, on the same note, did you also feel like were you the only black man, or was there a good balance of diversity in the academic space, or what was your experience in that lens?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, so it's interesting because it's like going through school. I was in Petersburg. That's a majority black school. Same thing with my undergraduate, HBCU, right? Graduate school diversity. I was in DC. Everybody was there, right? So you got a nice mix of all kinds of cultures, international cultures, everything. And then when I went into the jobs, I found, basically as the more of these up I went, there were very few minorities as you went further, very few black folks in general. And it was interesting because that kind of helped with my thinking around coming back to the university as well, right? So it's an interesting thing. Let me kind of frame it.
Okay.
So growing up in Petersburg, it's interesting. You look at it and people say, well, you were from Petersburg, and back then we had the reputation you hear about the school. You would think we were all coming to school with bulletproof vests on and running around. And the fact is, though, we were actually there my classmates were smart. My teachers were smart. I had, black males as math science teachers. I had black females as math and science teachers, and all the other things across. I got to Norfolk State. I saw the same thing. I get to grad school. I see a bunch of different cultures, but they're doing the same thing. So to me, there was never a difference. There was never this. You don't know that there's a problem until you get to a place where you don't see other folks, right? Because you're surrounded by people who are doing it all the time. It's normal.
Right.
And like I said, my family
that's
as well.
Interesting. I feel like that's sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's an interesting, I don't hear, as like a white male, in my circles, I don't hear as much about like empowered black communities, in modern day. So it's cool for me to hear, and I don't know what it's like now, but it's really cool for me to hear that you had, you just like felt empowered, like, and you were surrounded by like black men, role models, people that look like you, talked like you, that were doing really cool things and being leaders and educators. It's just like, I know we've got a lot of problems all across the country, but it's just cool to hear that you grew up in a pocket where you felt like, it's just cool to see that we had that somewhere in America,
Right. And I would argue that, like I said, the things I heard from outside of that space were totally different from what I saw inside of the space, right? You would believe though that we were in the most rough and tumble place ever. But like I said, it was totally not. It didn't live up to those negative stereotypes. So I learned to kind of take some of that stuff with a grain of salt. I'm not saying we don't have some problems out there. I'm just saying that I learned to be a little more, that it doesn't always line up, right?
Who do you think was, like, who do you think, and obviously this is just your experience. I'm not asking you to like speak for, the entire black race, or just for Petersburg in general, but like, who do you think those voices are? Like, what are those voices I guess like that's a weird disconnect. And do you think that you maybe were and just kind of you just kind of lucked out and you were in a great area, or do you feel like it's the voices maybe are overstating without, I don't know, like what do you think is the reason for that? It's just kind of an interesting question.
Yeah, just an opinion. I can't say for sure with all of it, but a lot of it I think is it comes to exposure, right? So if you are shown a negative view, and I would say that during that time there was a lot of, I mean, if I looked at media stuff and I watched it over time, right? As a kid, I watched it, and this is going to sound like I'm going off course, but I promise you, I'll tie it back together.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I watched a bunch of different shows, right? I would watch shows like Mission Impossible, and my favorite shows like Columbo, and all these shows where you would look at it and say, well, it's different. But if you look at Mission Impossible, there was this one guy, Barney, who's the black guy, right? And he's the tech guy, and he's like smart. And nobody ever looked at him funny or whatever. He's just the smart guy. And they went to Barney when he needed to do stuff, and he did it, and it was great, right?
He was the guy that says, "I don't know, I just don't know," on the subway. Remember that?
I don't know. I don't remember that episode, but yeah.
Oh, I love that scene. Yeah, they're talking about doing something crazy, and he's like, and it's like super risky. He's like, "I don't know." It's a great scene.
It's just,
so anyway, so Barney for you is an example of what?
So he was a guy he was a smart guy. He happened to be a black guy, but it was not a big deal. That wasn't the thing. It was like he was a smart guy, and people just took to. So I didn't see anything different about him. He was one of the team, right? It's just how it worked. So you're exposed to that, right? You're exposed to images of black people in places where they were excelling, they were doing great things, and like I said, my classmates, my role models were doing great things. So it's exposure. Now, if you go to the media at that time, you didn't see a lot of that outside of those shows. And as times went on, you saw a more negative spin to things, and it's just what it is, right? I'm not saying that the negative stuff wasn't there. I'm just saying that I think there's negative stuff in every culture, in every space, right? And I think it's how you emphasize it that makes the difference. So,
right.
My belief, of course, is that at some point you get some level of confirmation bias, right? Where if you see enough negative material, you'll start to say, well, it must be negative there, right? This is just my view of it, right? So if you're not in that space with the same people and you don't see that positivity, then from the outside, you will make the assumption, that, hey, look, it must be a bad situation over there, right? And if there is some bad thing that happens, it gets amplified where the good things don't necessarily get raised up as well. So I think that's where some of that is. So in my opinion, I think what happens is people just don't, and to be fair, like I said, and I've had cases where people have said, man, I'm surprised you're a black guy because I'm a computer scientist, right? Like that, like it's weird to be a technical person as a black person. Not often. I'm not
for them. Yeah.
Yeah. For them, it's weird because they haven't seen it. Right. So it comes down to exposure, even unfortunately, among younger black people. Right. There have been cases where, if you articulate a certain way, they'll say, well, you talk like a white person. And so it's a big multicultural thing that we probably have to address at a bunch of different levels.
Yeah.
The thing I would say to them is, I'm a person who was born in the USA. I was raised in the USA. I speak English like the way we were taught to speak English, right? So it's not, there was this time when we started to make it that to know how to articulate or whatever was considered negative in some circles, right? Not everywhere, but most people I know didn't talk in a way that was negative. So it's this weird, this weird exposure thing that I think we have to be careful as we are looking at pipelines of people coming into these disciplines to see, one, they can see people doing it because, like I said, I saw it and it was normal. And then encourage people to say, don't discourage people. And this is not just, this is being black in the industry. I've seen the same thing with women in the industry. It's just if you encourage people and people see themselves doing these things, then it will be natural for them to start doing them. So I think we have a responsibility to help people in that space. But yeah, I do a lot of times find that I'm the one of the few black males in that space, and it's to this day, I'm still the same way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely am guilty of, like almost in my bumbling effort to be like, to try to think how to help struggling communities in America. I think of the inner city community here in Richmond, mostly Black, and I tend to, because I don't have a ton of Black friends. Like I have a bunch of acquaintances, but like my core circle, and growing up, I just didn't have any really Black friends. And so I'm definitely guilty of not being able to hold two ideas in my head. One, that we have, like the Black Lives Matter. Like if you're Black in America, you're statistically disadvantaged than other groups, and we need to solve for that. And then also the idea that, that there are a ton of Black people that are completely empowered, don't need any help from anybody, and like don't necessarily need me to like think of what's the problem to solve, and they just need me to just like stop being racist or stop being stupid, and just start like opening my mind a little bit. And I'm definitely guilty of like having a hard time holding both of those in my head, in spite of knowing a bunch of Black engineers and Black technologists. It's still like, as like a just a bumbling white person, it's sometimes difficult to kind of like. So it's interesting to hear that, and just like it's just interesting to hear. I tend to think, oh, like if you're a Black kid in America, you're disadvantaged, but I think that's just a stupid way to think about it. Instead, it's just a more nuanced way. Is like, we've got an institutional problem that is statistically, statistically you're disadvantaged if you're in this group, but that doesn't not everyone is this like caricature, like, inner city victim, and it's just, right. I'm saying that because I'm sure there's other white dudes that are going to listen to this, and so I'm there with them. I'm personally trying to go through that. But anyway, thanks for sharing that. That's honestly just super helpful for me to hear, and it just grows my mind just a little bit, which is what I need in that area.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and I will say to finish it out. Yeah, even as I went up that path, right, I ran into, like I said, it's running into the groups that are like me. When I look at myself, I see myself doing these things. But then I ran into other groups of folks. I mean, I had great white professors, I had great Indian professors, Pakistani professors, Chinese professors, all the way across the board. And I can say that they gave me support, and they, there wasn't somebody who was saying, you can't do this. Okay, I did run into the one guy who's like, well, you came from like little Norfolk State. This is probably going to be hard for you. Not at one of the schools I graduated from, but my point was, this guy has no idea. Like, and the semester later, he's like, oh, you passed these classes. I'm like, dude, they were not much different than what I had. But his perception was that these were all inferior programs. So, but generally I found support in these communities as well. I think even my DOD days, I had a great technical director there who really pushed me at one point and said, hey, look, man, you are saying you want these things, but don't you think you're more qualified for these? And I'm like, well, yeah. He's like, well, put it down there, right? Just people who really push me at every step to say, go do more. My advisor was that way. I had people on my committee who were that way. But it all came from that underpinning of not being, I guess, seeing it already. It wasn't like, it was like, I didn't think I couldn't do it. It's like, oh man, I just got to go do more stuff, and it's.
Yeah. That's just so cool. And it's so cool that you are like, you can say that you like, if someone's like, yeah, I graduated from, a Petersburg high school, like now people have one more reason to kind of like perk up and show some respect, because that's a great high school. Cause I think people might be like, oh, it's Petersburg. It's not like, Deep Run or some like West End, Yeah. Yeah, no, it's like a whole, it's a whole mind shift that is needed. But anyway, so thanks for kind of explaining that a little bit. And we spent a ton of time. This is an awesome conversation. So but just to kind of keep things moving, this is definitely my most interesting intro conversation I've ever had. So you end up working as a technologist, and then can you kind of like take me from then to Terazo? Or then, because you were a technologist when you joined Terazo. Can you take me from then to Terazo?
Yeah. So I'll do a quick fast forward, not to belabor the time so much, but I stayed in academia for a while. And then I actually I did some entrepreneurial stuff, right? I built a couple of companies, and mostly doing government contract stuff, right? So I kind of stayed in my lane a little bit and did some things. And then from there, I got to the point where I realized, hey, look, I'm trying to get this thing going the way I want, but I'm starting to manage more than I am keeping my hands dirty, which is an interesting place for me, right? I found myself saying I like to build things, and I like to be strategic in them, but I still got to keep a hand down in the weeds a little bit. So I ended up going off and doing some consulting and stuff like that in various hops. And eventually I ended up, I was leaving, I had become a dean, which is, once again, like I said, I reached an administrative point. I'm like, it's great. It's great to be able to influence the programs and build some really cool stuff. But at the same time, I still like to teach and I like some of the other things. So I ended up actually going back to start another company. And that's when I got a call from a guy just out of the blue. And this guy was like the most persistent guy ever. He's like, you got to come to Capital One. And I'm like, nah, man, I'm not doing that. I'm not going into the corporate, whatever. And this guy called me like 8 times that day. And I was like, look, man, I will do the interview if you stop calling me. If you say this is the last call. He was like a recruiter or whatever, right? And,
wow.
like,
That's impressive for a recruder almost.
Yeah.
That's like, really annoying, but really impressive.
Love it. Yeah. He was one of these guys. It was constant, but he wasn't like obnoxious. Right. It's kind of weird to describe his personality. So it was like, okay, man, I'll do this. Right. And then I had to call him back and say, okay, man, you were right. This was awesome. Right. So I ended up going to work for Capital One. And and I told him, I said, look, man, I won't doubt you. I even shouted out to him on LinkedIn and everything. Right. So so this was like
what was his name? Just out of curiosity.
His name was Obad. I don't remember his last name now, but Obad was his first name. And he got me. So he's on my LinkedIn page. He's still on it now. And
oh, cool.
This guy, man. I mean, but he totally called it right. And I got to Capital One, and I absolutely loved it. Worked with some great folks over there. I was in the rewards space, and some great people over there, and spent a lot of time building in there, and kind of moved over to fraud at some point, probably a couple years in or whatever.
Okay. That's where I started at Capital One, fraud tech.
Awesome. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. So I enjoyed it, man. It was a really good place. It was nice to have all of the coffee and all of my creature comforts. It was kind of like a university campus, but I'm doing cool stuff or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But then I got to the point where it was like, okay, well, I kind of want to do some things that are sort of outside of that mold, right? I was on vacation and I got a call from great recruiter here, Lori. I don't know if I'll just say Lori Jennings. She was like awesome, and she's so I've gotten these great calls over time, and it's been this time it was totally not like that. She's like, hey, this is a great opportunity. You might want to look into it. And we talked a little bit, and I came back from vacation and talked to the folks over at Terazo, API Vista then. And when I saw that they were doing a lot more nuanced things, right? They were doing and a lot more open things, similar things to what I was doing at Capital One, but just a much wider berth, right? So you're talking about things like now we're doing more languages, more still DevOps stuff, but like more containerization in a lot of different places, great practices and stuff like that. I'm like, man, I got to go over there and do that. I weighed on it for a while though, because it was like you're leaving this large corporate company, right, to go to. It was a startup. It might have been a couple of years along, but it was still a startup, right? And it's like, man, do you do it? Do you not do it? And but they had a great team of folks I was talking to. They all had great quality of life stuff. I'm like, man, I got to make the jump now. So that took me over to Terazo at that point to get started.
And that was a couple years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah, that would be 2 years ago, actually.
Oh, just 2 years ago. Okay, so you went over there. What was like, if you could describe it, what was the thing that made you like perk up and say, okay, this is the right move for me? Like if you could boil it down to the biggest factor.
It's the biggest one, like I said, because the technology I'd seen that they had the chops and they were doing the right stuff in the technology space. I really feel like it was the people and the work-life balance and stuff that they had as well. So I felt like you could really be like this really high performing person and still have a lot of good time and interaction with folks in the company and all of that stuff. So that's what really drove me. That company culture was the big thing.
Almost like a family, like a family.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, it's a place where, and no disparagement one way or the other, right? But if you go to Capital One and look, like my org chart, I probably had you 7, 8 from
it's different.
CEO, right? It's just the nature of a large corporation.
Right.
Nothing different. Over here, it was like I was reporting directly to the COO, right? So it's like there's a short hop to the person who can support your decisions, and you have a lot of latitude to go in and build things the way you see them being before that structure is in place. So I thought that was really interesting. But the folks were really, man, I mean, you come in, you sit, you just feel like you're at home, and
Yeah.
just enjoy it, man. It drew me in, so.
That's cool. So, and so people that, just real quick, people that don't know what Terazo does, and I want to just to give a real roadmap for the next 10, 15 minutes. I want to ask you about that. I want to ask you about your thoughts on education, like tech education and tech, how to open up the floodgates and get more good engineers in, that are educated and educate ones that we already have. And then lastly, what's your favorite thing to do in Richmond in your spare time? So 3 more questions. And then
I'll put some brevity in there, man. I'm gonna get you. Yeah.
All right. No. Don't worry about brevity. I just want to give you an idea, because I hope I don't keep you too long. So that first question, can you maybe tell me about Terazo? Maybe you can tell what Terazo does through a use case that you guys did or delivered on, and maybe what's your role there as well. And then also you can do a little plug for hiring. You have my permission.
Right. I'll take it. Terazo is largely we consult with a bunch of companies, but it's consulting that's slightly different from what I've seen before. It's more like a company that will partner with other companies, right? So it's not necessarily just like a staff aug arrangement or anything like that. When I started, we were just in Richmond. We were in like Raleigh, Durham, and spreading out as well. And we go into a place and we partner with them and we help them build out API platforms. We'll help them with, like I said, the DevOps stuff. How do you get better practices around that? We do some managed services, and we also do some data work as well. So doing some data engineering, how do people, now that they've gotten these APIs and logs, how do you start to use that data to maybe surface some good business enhancing stuff? Use case wise, I think we've been working on a couple of nice things, some cool things lately. One, I don't know how familiar you are with Twilio, but we do a lot of cool Twilio work, which has been a lot of fun. So we had a use case where we were building out chatbots, right? So intelligent chatbots using the Twilio platform for a customer. And man, it's like some
people that don't know, Twilio is just like it's a third party for lightning fast messaging, right?
Yeah. So you got all the telephony stuff via an API. You've got text, you've got chat, you've got video, and all these different kinds of communication services that you can access via APIs, which is really sweet. We were able to do some things where we were, able to take processes that, like, for example, in the insurance space where people have to send a lot of paper and stuff back and forward, to turn it into something where you get a text message and then you end up, that thing opens up into a reactive web page and you can go through and do your whole process, via your mobile device, right? So really cool use cases backed by Twilio, and a lot of MongoDB stuff in the back as well. So a lot of JSON-based databases and NoSQL versus relational stuff in those cases.
And
so
Mongo would be great for that use case, because Mongo is special because it's that like document model that you can pull an entire like a user's profile with one API call instead of having to do a bunch of joins on a database.
Right. Yep, exactly.
Really cool.
A nice performant system, and it's cohesive like that as well, right? And good schema management, and being able to migrate them more easily as well. So I thought that was really a really cool case. Another one that I thought was pretty cool was we were taking a relational system, right? Running on an older back end, and being able to take that data, migrate it into a Mongo database, right? To be able to get rid of those joins, 20, 30, 40 joins, right? Trying to get data together into a single document model that we could then enhance over time. So as more information is happening, as logistics work, right? More information is coming in, we could enrich those objects and then build APIs in front of them to serve the data out. So it's a little bit cheaper to run and all of that kind of stuff. So the cool thing about it is it's a lot of modernization efforts, which we've been doing lately as well. That's not everything. We do a lot of different things, but those two come to mind as like really cool projects that kind of show at a bucket level what we do, right? So you've got some older stuff, right? We can put some new stuff around it and then migrate it forward in a way to kind of remove that reliance on the older thing.
That's cool. Yeah. Obviously, and it sounds like, I mean, and this is a given with a really good practical mindset, as opposed to giving the customer something that's going to take 6 months and cost $1 million.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
You can start small, you can figure out a piece and iterate your way to the bigger solution. That's always my favorite thing these days. Be able to show some kind of delivery, to deliver early and often, you can get your hands around it and figure out what's right and what's wrong with it. I'm not saying it's always been perfect doing that, but as much as possible, we like to be as, get it out in front of somebody as fast as you can, man. And
yeah. So you started out as a lead architect and head of R&D. And then this summer you transitioned into a market technical director. So can you explain that role right now? Like kind of like what are you just, is a market technical director almost just are you just like the guy who manages all the projects?
Not quite, but yes, but I do have, I guess the role is twofold, right? One is as we go out and we talk to businesses about their solutions and stuff like that, I'll come in and help with some of the technical solutioning around that, right? So it's still got some architectural components to it, right? But it's sort of at a little bit higher level where strategically, where would you like to go, right, in what you're trying to do? So there's that customer-facing component or potential customer-facing component that's there.
Cool. So almost like for a customer, it's like maybe the reason market is in there. It's like, how can you position yourself better in the market type of, is it market in that sense? Like you're helping the customer be better in their market, in their industry?
Yes.
Like, so being that strategic partner thing?
Right. Yes. And you're bringing along that the technical thing. So looking at their current state, like what technical solutions can you bring along, can you bring to bear to make them a leader in their space, right? How would you propose it? How would you do it in a way that's cost effective or, or the fastest or whatever the right way is? So there's some architecture, there's some knowing what's happening in the space where things are going strategically and kind of combine those things to be able to produce good proposals and stuff for them to be able to figure out if they needed to go forward or not. The other thing is, looking at best practices across the board and trying to figure out how can we drive those practices into the company so that, when we go to deliver something, we can give a more consistent thing across all of the customers, right? So for example, I believe in building tools that will help you to become productive more quickly than necessarily having a bunch of training to do the same thing. I think you train, but you also have tools. So for example, if a new engineer comes in on day one and you want to have them go to a project, do you need to teach them all of the ways that you've figured out best practices? Or do you need to teach them to scaffold a project with a tool, sort of do a little bit of work in it, guide them along with it, right? And then be able to say, okay, now this is the overarching best practice that we put in place here. This is there. So you can teach by example, right? It kind of helps to bring folks on a little bit better. So that's the other part of the role that I look at as an important part. And that's something that I'm kind of spinning up into now is, and being able to go across the projects and figure out how we surface some of those things, for the betterment of the entire company. Yeah.
Yeah. So are you guys hiring?
Yes, indeed. We are. And I don't have the sheet in front of me, but I know we're hiring at least, last I checked, I think it was 3 mid-level to senior level developers. And I want to say we're also looking for an engagement lead as well. So and our website, Terazo.com, we have our postings there, but we are certainly hiring.
All right.
And doing some cool stuff with some cool people.
All right. So and people can, just so we don't forget, people can contact you on, in case someone's going to stop the podcast right now, just to go send you a message. Is LinkedIn best, or is there, Greg at Terazo or something that they can email?
Yeah, I would say you can email me at gregory.patrick@Terazo. And I'll certainly pass that along. And we also have, I think we may have a bucketed, there's either a bucket email, or we actually have an internal recruiter who could also take some of those as well. But I would say if you go to LinkedIn, for now, if you need to go to LinkedIn or you want to email me there, hit me up there, and I'll definitely get you hooked in on what we got going on. Some cool stuff.
Cool. Okay, so So second to last question, education. So I had a great conversation with Julia Barnhart, who's over at CarMax, who's one of the data scientist leads,
Okay.
and or I guess she just leads their machine learning, and she kind of took a long and winding path to become kind of the engineer she is today, and so we had a great conversation about just sort of like the wackiness of needing a college degree in order to get into the field. You kind of provide an interesting counterpoint to that because you have this insane depth and this like academic rigor that is I'm sure that like has given you maybe not sort of applicable knowledge, but has given you a mindset that allows you to quickly like, deconstruct and segment out problems and then provide like, come up with clear, concise solutions to them. So anyway, you're interesting, like, well, what about this situation with like the whole argument of we don't need education to like ditch formal education and we'll just do everything through like, Udacity and YouTube and acloudguru.com. So
Right.
like what are your thoughts on sort of how we can, from an education standpoint, get more engineers from being kids in high school who want to be engineers to or people who are in different industries that are unhappy but that are talented? How can we get those people across that education hurdle so they can come to that first interview and say, hey, I know Linux, I know Python, I know DevOps practices, and I know cloud? Like, how can we get people across that hurdle?
That's a great question. And one of the things I've done recently is I taught at some boot camps as well. So I've been in both sides of it, right? And I think there's room for both of these things. I think that the key is this. I feel like the education part of it is what, if you do go that route, right? If you go and take the educational part, or even if you do the boot camp part, I think in both cases, you're trying to converge on one thing. You're trying to converge on a point where you have the fundamental knowledge to be able to learn new things, right? I think that's
Right.
the real nugget in this whole industry, right? It's can I take some problem, right? And like you said, decompose it down into its base form and then figure out with whatever the current technology is, how to solve it. Well,
Right.
I think from the college perspective, the complaint that I've generally heard is, people get this book knowledge, is what I'll quote it, but they don't know how to actually use it when the time comes. That's the complaint I've heard on the one hand.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I've heard that people coming from the boot camp side who have this really tactical knowledge and can do things, but they don't necessarily have the skills to be able to translate that when a new problem comes in that's outside of that window.
Right.
But both
Interesting.
are going towards the same place where you have this practical knowledge and the ability to act on it.
Right.
So from my perspective, I think it doesn't matter which one of those ways you go. I think we're going to have, in order to meet the employment needs and stuff, we're going to have to look at some of the more non-traditional ways of bringing folks in. So that does include the boot camps. That includes getting people earlier in the pipeline and kind of sort of what I would consider more what people consider like a trade route for it, right? There's I know how to do certain things. I know how to use Git. I know how to write this specific code. Like you said before, like maybe I know Python. I know how to do a little bit of data science or whatever the case may be. And I have the ability to go in and learn the rest. Likewise, I think in the educational side, one has to be prepared to say, look, I need to be doing more hands-on work. I need to be potentially contributing to an open source project or making my own open source project or, just being curious and actually doing some of the things, not just learning what they are, but like tactically learning how to do it. I think that the
Yeah,
institution
totally.
help with that as well, right? I mean, one of my things I was telling a friend of mine who is currently starting a computer science program that, hey, look, you may be asked to turn your programs in on Blackboard, right? But you're never going to do that in practice, right? So get into the habit of using Git, and maybe we need to get faculty in the habit of taking assignments via Git. So then students build that proficiency. So I think in both sides, the key has to be if you're coming in it from the side where you're tactical, you have to be ready to go and learn how to learn new things quickly, right? To me, that's the only thing that really matters. The other side, you have to learn, you learn these things, you learn how to learn things quickly, but you have to learn how to put them to use to make them practical. And that's the only problem we need to solve. There's a bunch of ways to solve it, but I think we have to be more tactical in the way that we get people to be productive. The one thing I'll say is it's difficult when as a professor, you have to teach all of these things, right? You have all these different curriculum things you need to hit. And those things may not be applicable on day one, right? I walk into a company and they say, fire up this thing and do it. But if you had been at a university that only used Windows, you may not have never seen a Unix box, right?
Right.
And at that point, you're already behind. So we have to find a way to kind of bridge those gaps by giving people more practical things to do in that space. And like I said, I feel like the boot camp side, I think is more, you have to give people a chance, right? They've come in, they probably worked hard for 6 months, 8 months. They've learned a boatload of stuff. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff, and they may not know how to apply everything to every problem. They may not understand the underpinning, but you have to go in and say, well, look, I'm going to take the technical skills they have now and develop them engineer going forward. And that includes people discipline as well.
That's interesting hearing you talk about that. I feel like maybe like a way to think about it would be, if you're an academic computer science grad, maybe like you said, find a small open source project and contribute to it, and then maybe also build your own personal website and keep it running like over the course of several months. And then maybe on the other end, if you're a boot camp grad, maybe you, like for me, I kind of come from more of the boot camp grad side, even though I didn't do a boot camp. I just kind of learned on my own, and I did do a program at VCU. But for me, what was always really helpful to kind of put things into perspective was I learned the history of technology, or at least as much as I could. And that always gave me, like, whenever I saw a new component, I walked it back like at least 10 years to kind of see where it came from, and like how the thought behind it has evolved. So now I feel like when I encounter a new problem, I kind of know why people have used, like, for example, Docker. Like I know what problem Docker originally solved, or what problems it solved, like what exactly it is. Like in terms of like what in terms of like a workflow, what is it? From a technical product, what is it? And then like, and like where what the environment of Docker is right now and kind of where it's headed. Like knowing those things, like through a combination of like blog posts and podcast episodes and YouTube tutorials, like I feel like I kind of, when someone mentions Docker, I at least know what questions to ask. So that's like, to me, that's and another kind of interesting thing too. I feel like it to help people from the boot camp side is like some questions to ask. Like one, I feel like is, I always ask, what does it run on? That to me always like that will fill in any gaps. When people talk about some sort of thing that they're doing, if I pause and say, hey, what does it run on? They have to stop and kind of like actually explain what it does. And then also like, how do you test it? That's another like really good one to ask. That will reveal kind of like how it works and how you can actually get your hands dirty with it. And then, I just feel like there's some, it's an interesting problem. And I feel like you're totally right that like, that's an interesting call out which is that we got to kind of hack it. We got to kind of figure out how to come up with some good ways to come up for people coming from both angles.
Yeah. And to add one more thing, not to take too much time, but I'll add one more thing from my own background.
Yeah.
Like I said, I probably lucked into that, right? Because I was doing academic and consultant I was always doing both, right? And the one thing I figured out in doing all of that was no matter what new tech comes out, it's to your point about asking a question, right? It's like, I hear the cool marketing name. I know it's some cool thing, but it's like, but what is it, right? And when somebody says, oh, it's a thing that queues or it does this or that, it's like, oh, that's the thing I learned back in data structures, back in whatever. You can always tie it back to your fundamental knowledge. So people try to chase the field, right? It's kind of hard to keep up with all of these new things that are coming in until you realize that they're all based on sound underlying principles.
Interesting.
And if you can get to those, you can learn any of them in no time, right? That's
so maybe the question would be like, what's the framework? And then if you understand the framework, maybe that can reveal that it's just a re-implementation of some old idea.
Right. Yes. And then you'll understand how to take advantage of whatever its claim to fame is. Surely it's built something on top of that, but you know 80% of it already, right? Because you know.
Totally. And you can guess at what, if something doesn't work properly, you can be like, well, maybe it's that because it would make sense that wouldn't work given my knowledge of the framework in general.
Right. Exactly.
So okay, last question for you. And I'm so sorry, I've like totally kept you longer, and I've ran.
No, man, it's all good. I'm enjoying it. It's good talk. I kept you. I hope it's not too long to bore people to death listening to me drone on.
Oh no. My only risk right now is my wife, she's wrangling my kids, and she's probably gonna give me an earful.
Let me free you up then. Yeah.
Because I didn't do the best job planning of this, and you learned that as well. So anyway, what's your favorite thing to do in Richmond when you get some spare time?
Man, I'm a simple guy. I'm like a homebody or whatever. So I mean, the thing is, I would say we like to eat, man. Like this foodie. I guess if I had to pick the one thing, it's like finding some cool new place to eat around here and just going to eat it. There's so much good food here, right?
What's your favorite place you've gone to recently? Obviously, coronavirus.
Right.
Noted.
Yeah.
It can be in the last year. We'll say that because
it's hard to pick a favorite, but and the one thing I can say I've kind of jumped into, Don't Look Back, the taco.
Yeah, they're right near my house.
Man, that's some awesome stuff, man. So that's the one that as of late I've been kind of like, this is really good stuff, right? It's a different way than the way I've always eaten these things, and I've enjoyed them. But I like a lot of the mom and pop stuff that's around. So if I can find something that's different, a lot of stuff. I mean, I haven't been down there lately, clearly, but something like Shindigs down in Carytown, like a lot of the desserts and stuff. I've still, ran up on it one Tuesday, man, and after that we were going like too much, right? So all
right. So if somebody talks to you, gets in the interview pipeline, if you want to bribe Greg, go pick up some Shindigs, drop it off at Terazo. Yeah, that's some good stuff, though, man. That's some dangerous stuff.
Yeah, I'm back to my workouts, man. I gotta get ready for when we can get back out there.
Yeah. What do you work out?
Look, I used to work out a lot. I've stopped and started here lately, and I've committed to now going back to my consistent 3 days a week, full body workout, and then some cardio on the other days. And
that's is that mostly like, is that your biggest wellness tool? Is exercise?
It is that, and I do a lot of reading as well. But I read all over the place, right? So a lot of the mental well-being, I read a bunch of stuff. Like I said, it may seem like it's totally unrelated to tech, but it's just those things open my mind, and they kind of take me away from, because it's a thinking person's job, right? So you gotta free the mind a little bit and wander. So I may be looking at some biology or physics or some cool thing about businesses, or some weird whatever, some Star Wars thing that I'm reading again, or whatever, right? But do that stuff to keep my mental state good, right? And then physically, I do tend to exercise, and I try to walk around the neighborhood quite a bit as well. So
that's Greg. Can we do a part 2? Would you be against that?
We can do it.
All right. I'm going to set this up because I feel like I've got a lot more questions for you, and you may be the most interesting man in Richmond. So
I appreciate that, man. I've enjoyed this talk, so it's cool.
Yeah, dude. Thanks again for taking the time, and yeah, we'll be in touch soon. Hopefully we can do a episode 2 pretty soon.
All right, sounds great, man. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man. All right, talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
All right, bye. All right, guys, tune in 2 weeks for the next episode of RVA Tech Talks. And as always, we're tremendously appreciative of this week's sponsor, Summit Human Capital. And please reach out to them at summithumancapital.com. And shout out to Claire Morgan at notterly.com, who edited this episode.